If your parents split when you were young, you didn't become broken by their divorce. You became hyper-aware of fragility in every relationship you entered. You learned to predict collapse before it happened every single time. You became the family's emotional barometer, the one who felt frost forming. This wasn't weakness, this was survival, and it's running your relationships today. The moment your parents separated, something shifted at a cellular level, not because a family broke, that's the victim story we tell ourselves, but because you experienced the moment when forever stopped being together. Your attachment system, the part that learned trust, had to reorganize itself. The architecture of safety you'd been building since birth got restructured completely. Your brain did exactly what it was designed to do. It adapted, but adaptation isn't healing, adaptation is survival, and survival builds walls. What you lived through in those first weeks was more complex than sadness. There was the immediate disorientation, the loss of daily contact with one parent, the reorganization of physical space, the strange silence when they weren't there. But deeper than that was something more insidious. You realized something devastating. The people who taught you what love meant couldn't make their own love work. That's not a small thing, that's your foundation of commitment, getting fractured. Many of you felt something else too, something you've never quite named: responsibility, the inexplicable sense that if you were good enough, it would matter. Maybe you could be the reason they stayed connected, even if not to each other. That wasn't delusion, that was your developing brain trying to solve impossible equations. You became a mediator between two worlds. Psychologists call this triangulation, a term that sounds clinical but really just describes the space you occupy. You existed in the middle, reading your mother's face for signs of pain, moderating your enthusiasm when talking about your father to avoid making her feel replaced, becoming an emotional thermostat that adjusted based on who you were with. You weren't traumatized by the divorce itself, you were shaped by the loyalty bind. The research is actually quite clear on this point, though it contradicts parental guilt. A study following children through separation for decades found something counterintuitive. The divorce event itself wasn't what damaged these kids' ongoing parental conflict. Was a clean break, however painful, was less psychologically corrosive than staying together. So if you're blaming your parents for splitting, ask yourself this question: would it have been better if they'd stayed together, frozen in bitterness? The real variable wasn't whether they divorced, it was what happened after. Whether they badmouthed each other to you, whether they made you choose sides, whether they maintained consistency across two homes or had different emotional temperatures, whether they used you as a messenger, a spy, or a prize to be won, whether they actually parented or the divorce became their excuse to emotionally absent themselves. If your parents managed that transition with basic dignity, you probably emerged resilient. But resilience isn't the absence of scars, it's the capacity to reorganize around damage. And children of divorce develop that capacity early at a devastating cost. What most adults don't realize is what that early reorganization cost them. You probably became very good at reading people, exceptionally good at it. You can sense when someone's pulling away before they themselves know it. You notice shifts in tone, changes in energy, the microsecond when eyes glaze over. This is a genuine skill. It served you in relationships and work, but it comes from a place of fear, needing to predict danger before it materializes. So while you have this superpower of emotional attunement, you're exhausted by it. You're constantly scanning for signs of abandonment, even in relationships that are solid. You might also find yourself struggling with anxiety that has no logical trigger, the sense that good things won't last, that people will eventually leave always. Even when you're in a stable relationship with someone who's proven themselves reliable, a part of you is waiting for the fracture. You don't fully believe in permanence. You learned early that permanence is an illusion. People make promises, then don't keep them. Not always out of malice, sometimes just out of human limitation. But your nervous system doesn't make that distinction. It just learned trust is dangerous. This creates a paradox that defines many children of divorce and adulthood. You crave deep connections, sometimes desperately. You want to be truly known, fully merge, but vulnerability feels like the setup for devastation, so you create distance. You pull away when someone gets too close. You leave before you can be left. Or you stay in relationships long after they've died, because leaving confirms nothing lasts. Your success at work might have a similar architecture built on the same foundation. If you're an overachiever, a perfectionist, someone who constantly adds one more thing, there's a possibility that comes from needing to prove your worth constantly. Children of divorce sometimes develop a quiet belief that if they're good enough, productive enough, they won't be abandoned. You can leave someone who's essential, so you become essential, and then you become exhausted by the effort of staying indispensable. Or perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps you struggled with motivation, with effort. If the people most central to your life couldn't make their commitment work, why should you believe in the permanence of anything built? Why build toward a future that might dissolve without warning at any moment? That's not laziness. That's a logical response to learning that security is temporary. What you're carrying isn't shame about your family's dissolution, it's something deeper. What you're carrying is a fundamental reorganization of how you understand stability. That reorganization made sense. It was appropriate. Your brain was protecting you. But that survival mechanism doesn't distinguish between genuine danger and ordinary vulnerability. It's still running, still scanning, still preparing for the next fracture. Here's what matters. Understanding where this comes from doesn't fix it immediately, but it does something more important. It lets you stop blaming yourself. You weren't broken by your parents' divorce, you were shaped by it. And shaped people have a particular kind of strength. They understand fragmentation. They know that things can break and that people can continue. They've learned much earlier than most that permanence isn't guaranteed, and showing up anyway is what matters most in the end. The divorce wasn't a wound that needs to heal into scar tissue. It was an education that you received too early in a language too harsh. But it's an education nonetheless. You learned how to reorganize identity in chaos, how to love people even when they can't love each other, how to maintain yourself when the framework around you shifts constantly. These are the skills that actually matter in an unstable world. If this resonates, subscribe. There's more like this coming.